From the moment he stepped out of his car, the air around him changed, not because of who he was, but because of what he drove. It was a cold December night, the kind that made breath visible in the air and turned every polished surface into a mirror of judgment. The 2018 Toyota Camry rolled up to the valet station without a ripple, without the reverence that usually greeted the luxury vehicles gliding past it. But to him it was more than a car, it was reliability, practicality, a symbol of a life built by honest labor. To them, it was an embarrassment. Standing by the Bentley, Victoria's parents were poised like royalty at the gates of their kingdom, their faces sculpted with generations of inherited pride. Mrs. Hartford's voice sliced quietly through the night, but intentional enough to pierce his ears. Is that really Bradley's father in that vehicle? No greeting. No warmth. Only disbelief, as though the presence of his modest car threatened to contaminate their image. Victoria rushed toward him, smiling tightly, but her eyes were pleading, desperate. Dad Bob, maybe you could park down the street? The partners are here. She spoke his name the way a nurse might speak to a confused patient, softly restraining him with faux politeness. She didn't call him father. She didn't call him dad. He was simply Dad Bob, a label crafted to keep emotional distance, as though he were an accessory from a past she preferred not to claim. Inside the law firm's Christmas party, candles glowed from polished tables, and crystal glassware glittered beneath chandeliers. Conversations floated through the air like expensive perfume, each word carefully measured to display status, intellect, importance. His son, Bradley, guided him through the crowd like someone trying to conceal a flaw. This is my father, Bob Miller. He's retired, Bradley said quickly, the last word landing like a cautionary disclaimer. Retired, meaning irrelevant, outdated, not worth further inquiry. When a partner politely asked what he used to do, Bradley did not pause to let him answer. Construction, he replied, dismissing decades of empire building with a single syllable. Manual labor. A man of sweat, not strategy. A man who worked with his hands, not his mind. The room nodded collectively, satisfied with the label they had been given. He stood silently, observing the people orbiting his son. The perfect son, the rising star, the polished lawyer. Yet every time Bradley referred to him, it felt more like he was introducing an obligation rather than a father. He didn't belong here, they thought. He was merely an echo from Bradley's past, a remnant of a version of life his son wanted to erase. But the real blade came not from society nor acquaintances but from blood. The second incident occurred in February, beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Greenwich Country Club. The building itself was structured to reject anything ordinary, grand marble columns, gold-trimmed portraits, and a silence that demanded reverence. It was a world meticulously crafted to reflect wealth, sophistication, and exclusivity. He had driven there to drop off jewelry belonging to his late wife, Sarah. Pieces with memories carved into their very gemstones. Her wedding earrings, a diamond bracelet she wore on their 20th anniversary, each one worth far more than the shallow glances cast upon them. But to the women assembled at the charity committee table, those jewels were not symbols of love, they were inventory. Robert, this is the Greenwich Country Club, Mrs. Hartford said, eyeing his khaki pants with visible disdain. There are standards. Victoria stood beside her mother, her tone gentle but sharpened beneath the surface. Dad Bob, next time you visit maybe you could dress up a little. People have certain expectations here. His pulse remained steady, his face unreadable. He nodded, handed them the diamond earrings without ceremony and turned to leave. But as fate would have it, he had forgotten his reading glasses at the table. When he returned he did not walk in, he paused just outside the doorway. He heard laughter. Soft laughter. The kind reserved for private mockery. I just don't understand how Bradley turned out so well with that background. Victoria's voice floated through the air like poison cloaked in silk. His father is nice enough but so ordinary. He barely finished high school. Bradley's embarrassed though he'd never say it. Pause. Then Mrs. Hartford replied, at least now with our family name, their children will have proper breeding. They won't inherit that working-class lineage. They laughed. They laughed at the man who had held his dying wife in his arms as she whispered her final wishes. They laughed at the man who had paid for his son's education, his law school apartment, his wedding. They laughed at the hands that had built the very floor they stood on. He stood for a full 30 seconds, holding his reading glasses in his palm, his reflection visible in the polished glass doors. Not a single word escaped his lips, but inside, something shifted. A quiet resolve formed, a steel thread of intention that would soon pull everything apart. That night, he sat alone in his kitchen, beneath the glow of a single lamp. The photograph of Sarah rested before him. Her eyes, forever captured in gentle concern, seemed to ask him a question she had often whispered in life. When will you stop protecting them from the truth? He picked up the phone. His attorney, Margaret, answered on the second ring. Margaret, he said, his voice calm, composed, decisive. I think it's time my family learned who they're dealing with. And with that one call, the quiet man they underestimated began to awaken the storm they never saw coming. The night had been quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if the world was holding its breath. The villa stood in its usual stillness, basked beneath the soft gray light of a winter moon. His villa, his sanctuary, the last living piece of Sarah's soul on this earth. The family photos was still on the mantel, her garden still bloomed in the backyard, her scent still lingered in the upstairs bedroom. It was not simply a house. It was a legacy, a vow, a resting place for decades of love and sacrifice. But at 7:14 p.m., everything changed. Bradley arrived that evening with a smile too polished to be real and a folder tucked neatly under his arm. Victoria followed behind him, her perfume preceding her entrance like a declaration of ownership. She didn't bother to sit. Instead, she floated through the living room, glancing at the decorations as though she had already replaced them in her mind. Bradley sat down across from his father at the oak dining table that had borne witness to Christmas dinners, birthday celebrations, and late-night conversations with Sarah. Now that same table was about to become the stage for betrayal. "Dad," Bradley began, using a tone one might reserve for legal clients who didn't understand the gravity of their situation. "We've been thinking a lot about your future." He slid the brochures across the table. Assisted living communities. Soft brochures filled with smiling seniors playing bingo and painting watercolors, their eyes hollow with resignation. "Sunset Manor is perfect for you," Bradley continued. "You'll be with people your age, you'll have activities, round-the-clock care. And it's only $4,000 a month, it's very reasonable." His father said nothing. He simply stared at the glossy cover of the brochure. A woman with silver hair smiled back at him from a garden bench, as though she had accepted the end of her life before it began. Then came the words that tore through the silence like a blade to flesh. "We already transferred the villa," Bradley said matter-of-factly. "Just temporarily to Victoria's parents. For your own good, until we figure out the best way to sell it." For a moment, there was no sound. No ticking clock. No hum of the refrigerator. Just a silence so profound it pressed on his chest like a physical weight. Transferred the villa. Not asked. Not consulted. They had taken it. "You, what?" he asked quietly, the words slow, controlled. Bradley looked slightly annoyed at his father's tone, as if he were being unnecessarily dramatic. "Dad, we've gone over this. You're alone. This house is too much responsibility. We're trying to protect you from financial disaster. Legally, it made more sense for the property to be in our name." In that moment, the memory of his wife resurfaced, not as a ghost but as a truth. She had died in that upstairs room, her last breath taken in his arms as she made him promise two things. Never let our son lose his humility, and never let this house fall into the wrong hands. They had broken both. He picked up the deed transfer papers. His own signature stared back at him. He remembered the day clearly now, 3 months ago at Bradley's urging. Bradley had said it was estate protection, a way to streamline things in case something happened. His heart had been heavy with grief then. He had trusted his son. That trust had been weaponized against him. "You said I could stay here as long as I wanted," he said softly. Bradley shrugged. "We changed the plan. This is what's best. You'll thank us later when you're settled in your new place with people your age." Victoria, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor like a countdown to execution. "We've even picked a room for you at Sunset Manor," she said brightly. "It's got a lovely garden view. Very peaceful." He stood slowly, rising not with anger but with clarity. The air shifted. Something ancient, dormant, stirred awake. "You believe I cannot manage my own life," he said. "Dad, be reasonable," Bradley insisted. "You've always struggled with finances. You're house poor. We're helping you." The lie was complete. The narrative was set. They had convinced themselves that betrayal was care. That theft was protection. That erasing everything he had built was an act of love. He looked around the home. The walls, the ceiling beams, the floors, they had all been touched by his hands. Every brick had been paid for by hours of sweat, years of sacrifice. This house was not a possession. It was proof that a man with nothing could, through sheer will, build everything. And now his own child had traded it for acceptance into a world of false prestige. "I see," he finally replied, stepping back from the table. His voice was calm, but there was something behind it, an undercurrent that made even Victoria pause. "When do you want me gone?" Bradley exhaled in relief, mistaking composure for surrender. "Within 30 days would be ideal. We want to list the property before spring." Composure remained on his face. But inside him, the storm had begun. After they left, he stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by silence. He touched the wall where Sarah's handprint was still faintly visible from when they painted the house together. He walked up the stairs, each step echoing with the memories of his son's childhood. He opened the bedroom door where Sarah had whispered her final words. And in that stillness, a decision formed, not in rage but in purpose. He walked downstairs, picked up the phone, and dialed his attorney. "Margaret," he said. "It's time." "Are you certain?" her voice replied. He looked around at everything they had tried to strip away from him. "I am no longer protecting them from the truth." And with that, the quiet man stopped being quiet. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with intent. The sky itself seemed to reflect him, silent, still, but gathering force beneath the surface. The betrayal no longer wounded him. It ignited him. And the world that had looked upon him as ordinary was about to witness the kind of power that only reveals itself when pushed past its last point of tolerance. Bradley showed up at 8:30 a.m. sharp, dressed for victory in a navy suit and red tie, confidence radiating off him like designer cologne. He walked into the kitchen with the solemnity of a man delivering what he believed was a necessary verdict. His father poured himself a cup of coffee, not offering any to Bradley. There was no need. Hospitality was for guests. Bradley was no longer one. "We need to go over your transition timeline," Bradley said, opening his leather briefcase and spreading documents across the kitchen table. "Sunset Manor has an opening on the 14th. We'll handle packing, and Victoria's parents have already contacted a realtor." His father took a slow sip of coffee, eyes steady. "You presume much," he replied quietly. Bradley didn't seem to hear the warning embedded in those words. "Dad, we've done the math. You can't afford this house. Your pension and Social Security barely cover the utilities. Financially, you're house poor," his father finished for him. Bradley nodded, relieved that he seemed to be getting through. "Someone has to be realistic," Bradley continued. The older man stood and walked to the window overlooking the garden. For a moment he said nothing. Then he turned, eyes not of a defeated old man, but of a general who had already drawn the battle lines. "Tell me," he said quietly, "did you ever go to bed hungry as a child?" Bradley blinked. "What does that have to do with anything? Did your mother ever go without medicine? Did this roof ever leak? Did you ever want for anything?" Bradley shifted, uncomfortable. "No. But that was then. And now," his father said, "you believe you are entitled to determine what I can or cannot afford." Bradley exhaled in irritation. "Dad, please. This isn't personal. It's a business decision." The older man gave a faint, almost amused smile. "That is precisely what you are about to learn." Bradley looked confused, but before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Standing at the door was Margaret Davis, his father's attorney of 23 years. Hair immaculate, eyes sharp, she stepped in with the composure of someone who did not negotiate with children. She opened a leather portfolio and placed it on the counter. Bradley stiffened. "Margaret? Why are you here?" Margaret didn't look at him. She turned to his father. "Everything is ready. Shall we proceed?" "Proceed," he answered. Margaret placed several files on the table, thick ones, embossed, marked confidential. "These are your active assets," she said. "Shall I summarize?" "For my son's benefit," he replied. Bradley's jaw tensed. "Assets? What assets?" Margaret began listing them. The manufacturing company's sale. Real estate holdings in 3 states. Investment accounts. Charitable foundations. trust portfolios, offshore reserves. Each figure that rolled off her tongue stripped away another layer of Bradley's certainty. When she finished, the room fell into a silence so deep it felt like a chasm. Bradley sat frozen. Dad. I don't understand. His father finally faced him fully. You believed I was incompetent. You believed this house was beyond my means. Bradley opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Why hide all of this? The older man stepped closer. Because true wealth, he said, is not measured by what you show, but by what you can afford to walk away from. Bradley looked as though the ground beneath him had vanished. But this was only the beginning. The signs begin. The next 48 hours were orchestrated with the precision of a silent symphony. 1. The lawyer's visit. Margaret arrived in her Mercedes, staying exactly 47 minutes. Every neighbor saw. 2. The newspaper. The Wall Street Journal, delivered daily as it had been for years, was now read on the front porch at precisely 9 a.m. Bradley and Victoria stopped by that afternoon. Victoria glanced at the headline, Global Market Projections, Philanthropic Economic Impact, then looked at him with uncertainty for the first time. Dad Bob, why do you read that paper? She asked, her voice thin. Habit. From construction work? Pause. From needing to stay informed. She didn't know what to make of that. 3. The phone calls. The first came during lunch. Bradley watched as his father answered calmly. Bob Miller. Mr. Miller, this is the governor's chief of staff. The governor would like to thank you personally for your support. Your contribution made a significant difference. Bradley froze. Glad to be of service, his father replied. When he hung up, Bradley asked, voice barely steady, Dad, what contribution? The kind that changes lives, came the reply. Later, another call. A federal judge's office. Invitations to galas. Mentions of press coverage. Each call was a revelation that cracked the illusion Bradley had lived in his entire life. By Thursday night, Victoria couldn't contain herself. Dad Bob, what exactly have you been doing all these years? He looked at her. The work of a man who never needed validation from those who could not recognize value. The final movement begins. The gala at the Greenwich Country Club was the stage. Bradley and Victoria attended with certainty. They saw themselves as among the elite, pillars of society. His father arrived quietly in his Toyota Camry, valet ticket in hand. He was greeted with confusion. Skepticism. Victoria approached him immediately. Dad Bob, this is a private $5,000 per plate event. Maybe you could help with coat check. He smiled softly. Yes, he said. It's time I contribute, at my level. They cheered his humility. They had no idea what level he truly occupied. Because in just 15 minutes the lights would dim. The judge would speak. And the name they had dismissed would echo through the grand ballroom as the largest donor in the room. Robert Miller. The man they had tried to erase, was about to become the name they would never escape. The ballroom lights dimmed just slightly, enough to hush the remaining whispers, enough to make the chandeliers glitter like frozen lightning. It was the moment just before truth strikes. At table 12, Bradley cut into his filet mignon, oblivious. Victoria lifted her champagne flute for a photograph, perfectly posed. Her parents sat regally, surveying the room as if presiding over their kingdom. They believed they belonged here. They believed he did not. Until Judge Patricia Wilson stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, tonight, we honor not wealth itself but the power of what you do with it. And no one embodies that more profoundly than our largest donor. The room fell into a stillness so absolute it felt as though time itself paused. This man has changed the future of pediatric care in our state. He has funded new surgical wings, scholarships for medical students and emergency aid programs, all anonymously until now. Bradley's fork slipped from his hand. Anonymously. That word echoed through his mind with chilling clarity. Victoria frowned, turning to scan the room as if she might recognize the face of this mystery benefactor. Her parents leaned forward, excitement in their eyes. Whoever this person was, they wanted to meet him. The judge continued, tonight, we honor the individual whose contribution of $2 million this year alone has made this event possible. A man of humble presence but immeasurable impact. A name began forming in Bradley's mind. A name he had never associated with greatness. A name he had spent years diminishing. Ladies and gentlemen, Please rise in recognition of Mr. Robert Miller. A gasp swept the room. Then a roar of applause, powerful, thunderous, unrestrained. The crowd stood as one. At table 12 no one moved. Bradley turned slowly, eyes wide, blood draining from his face as he saw his father, Dad Bob, rise from the shadows and step into the spotlight. He didn't walk quickly. He didn't beam with pride. He walked with the steady assurance of a man who already knew who he was. A man who did not need applause but allowed it. As he approached the stage, Victoria's hand trembled so fiercely she spilled champagne down her dress. Her mother's lips parted silently, as though trying to form words that no longer existed. Mr. Hartford stared, stunned, his mind trying to reconcile the man he dismissed with the truth now standing before him. Bradley could not breathe. The man he had tried to send to assisted living. The man he had stripped of dignity. The man whose name he was ashamed to speak in front of others. Was the most powerful man in the room. A speech like a blade. Robert Miller reached the podium. The applause slowly died, leaving a silence so heavy it demanded reverence. He placed his hand gently on the wood and looked out, not at the elite audience, but directly, unwaveringly at his son. "Thank you," he began, voice calm. "I stand before you not as a man who has accumulated wealth, but as one who has lived long enough to learn what wealth truly means." He paused. 30 years ago, I started a manufacturing company in a rented garage. I had no degree, no investors, and no one betting on me. But I had two things, work ethic, and a promise I made to my wife. At Sarah's name, his voice softened. She believed success is not measured by what you keep, but by what you give. A ripple moved through the crowd. People nodded, some even tearing up. But at table 12 no one moved. They were not hearing a speech. They were being judged. "In this room," he continued, "I see people of status, of influence. But let me be clear, status is not power. Titles are not power. True power is the ability to uplift others without needing to announce your own importance." Another pause. Then, softly but unmistakably. "And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is not the weakest, but the one who no longer needs to prove anything." The line landed like thunder wrapped in velvet. Bradley lowered his head. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Her parents sat entirely still, as if awaiting sentencing. Direct confrontation. After the standing ovation, after the cameras flashed and the media swarmed, Robert Miller slowly made his way toward table 12. Conversations halted as he passed. Hands reached out for his handshake. People leaned forward, eager to speak with him, honor him. But his eyes remained on one destination. Bradley stood as his father approached, tears slipping silently down his face. His body trembled, not with fear of punishment but with the crushing weight of shame. Robert sat down at the table. The others followed suit obediently, like schoolchildren before the headmaster. He rested his hands, steady, unwavering, on the white linen. "We were discussing my level," he said softly, eyes on the people who had mocked him. "Shall we continue?" Not a word was spoken. "My appropriate contribution," he continued. "The place you believed I belonged." Victoria whispered, "We were wrong." He looked at her, calmly, without malice. "No," he replied. "You were honest. You showed me exactly how you see the world. And now the world has shown you exactly who I am." Silence. Then, like a final verdict, "You took my house, my wife's memory, my dignity. In return I gave you the truth. Now, you will live with it." He stood. Bradley rose desperately. "Dad, please don't leave like this." His father looked at him, not with hatred, but with the most devastating expression a man could receive from his father. Disappointment. "You will hear from my attorney tomorrow," he said softly. "You have 30 days to vacate my home." Gasps rippled across the table. Bradley's knees buckled. Victoria covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "Dad, please. I'm begging you." Robert paused only once before leaving. "You were never ashamed of my car," he said quietly. "You were ashamed of my character. Tonight you saw my true character. The question is, can you live with yours?" And then he walked away, not just from the table, but from the version of himself they had tried to write. He walked not as Dad Bob, but as Robert Miller. A man no longer hidden. A father no longer silent. 5. The morning after the gala the world felt different, not for him but for them. Across Greenwich, Whispers moved through manicured streets and pristine coffee shops like wind through autumn leaves. They had called him Dad Bob, a harmless old man with nothing left but memories. Now he had become a legend. Newspapers printed his name in bold letters. Social media was ablaze. Son tries to take millionaire father's house, publicly humbled at charity gala. But while the world feasted on the scandal, Robert Miller didn't read a single headline. He didn't need validation. He had already reclaimed something far more valuable than reputation. His dignity. The eviction. By the third day the legal notices were delivered. Bradley and Victoria had 30 days to vacate the villa. No loopholes. No appeals. No more hiding behind perception. They arrived unannounced, faces pale, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. They didn't bring arrogance this time. They brought humility. Bradley stood on the porch, not daring to step inside until invited. Robert opened the door, not kindly, not harshly, but with the neutrality of a man who had nothing left to prove. "Dad," Bradley said, voice shaking, "can we talk?" Robert stepped aside. "You may enter what used to be your home." Bradley flinched at the precision of the words. They sat in the same living room where Sarah's laughter had once echoed. Where Bradley had opened Christmas presents, learned to walk, learned to speak. Now he struggled to find words. "Dad, we were blinded," Bradley confessed. "We cared more about image than truth. More about status than character. You didn't fail me as a father. I failed you as a son." Tears fell unrestrained. Victoria stepped forward next, her voice barely above a whisper. "We forgot that love is not a transaction. We tried to manage you, control you, instead of honor you. I was raised to chase refinement, not integrity. But I see now, refinement without respect is just vanity." Robert listened. Not as a man hungry for apology, but as a father weighing whether hearts were changing, or merely bending under consequence. "Your mother warned me once," Robert said quietly. "She said if we gave you everything without teaching you gratitude, one day you would believe you were entitled to what you never earned." Bradley closed his eyes, pain etched into his features. "She was right," he whispered. Robert looked toward the garden, where morning sunlight struck the roses Sarah had planted. "This house is not just walls and furniture. It is the chronicle of a life your mother and I fought to build. You tried to sell it because you saw it as property. I fought to keep it because it is memory." Bradley's voice cracked. "I understand that now." Robert turned slowly, meeting his son's gaze with solemn finality. "Understanding," he said softly, "is the beginning of redemption. But redemption must be lived, not spoken. Rebuilding or losing forever." Bradley and Victoria moved into a small rental apartment downtown. No valet. No gated entrance. Just four walls and the truth they now had to face every morning. For the first time in their marriage they budgeted. They cooked their own meals. They worked, not for image but survival. The BMW was sold. Victoria took a job at a local boutique, her first real job in her adult life. Bradley stopped going to the country club. He canceled his memberships. He told his colleagues he could no longer attend $500 dinners, not because his father wouldn't pay, but because he refused to pretend anymore. Weeks passed. Then one day Bradley called. "Dad, I want to cook dinner for you. At our apartment. Nothing special. Just what we can afford." Robert paused before answering. "Integrity," he said, "begins at the dinner table. Dinner of truth." He arrived in his Toyota Camry, parking beside modest sedans. Bradley opened the door, no grand entrance, no host-like performance. Just a son greeting his father with quiet reverence. Inside the apartment was simple. An uncluttered dining table. A single framed photo of Robert and Sarah on the wall. Spaghetti simmered on the stove. Bradley served his father first. There were no servants. No fine china. Just two men, a meal, and a silence that held more healing than any apology could. Finally Bradley spoke. "Dad, I don't want your money. I don't want your house. I just want to earn back your trust. Even if it takes the rest of my life." Robert set down his fork. "Love," he said quietly, "was never lost. But trust must be rebuilt with every action you take from this moment forward." Bradley nodded, tears falling freely. "Then let this be the first action," he said. "Not as your heir, but as your son." And in that small, quiet apartment, a legacy was not passed down. It was reborn. The final message. That night, Robert returned to his villa alone. He sat on the front porch in Sarah's chair, the stars above glimmering like fragments of eternity. He spoke softly not to the night, but to the woman whose wisdom had guided him even in death. Sarah, our boy has finally found the kind of wealth that matters. The kind that cannot be inherited, only earned. Closing narration, haunting, reflective ending. There are two types of power in this world. The kind that announces itself with noise, and the kind that moves in silence, shaping destinies without ever raising its voice. For years he chose silence, not out of weakness but out of restraint. And when they mistook restraint for irrelevance, when they tried to bury his legacy beneath their pride, he did not raise his fists. He simply revealed the truth. Because the most powerful man in any room is the man who has nothing to prove, nothing to chase, and nothing to hide. And sometimes, it is only when you lose everything you took for granted that you finally see the person you should have revered all along. Months passed and the whispers in Greenwich slowly quieted, not because people forgot, but because they finally understood. Respect is not owed to wealth, nor commanded by power, but earned by character. And character is revealed in how a person treats those who owe them nothing. Robert Miller never returned to the shadows, but he did not bask in glory either. He continued living in his villa, the same modest way he always had. The only difference now was that those who once looked past him now greeted him with reverence. The neighbors who used to wave casually now stopped to speak. Not to flatter him, but to learn from him. One afternoon, while tending to Sarah's roses, Robert saw Bradley's car pull into the driveway. Not the BMW he had sold that long ago. This was a modest sedan, gently used, paid for with his own earnings. Bradley got out holding a small wooden box. "For you," he said quietly. Robert opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a folded document. The letter read, "Dad, this is not a request. This is not a transaction. This is a promise. I have legally renounced all claims to this house and everything you own. What you have built is yours alone. My inheritance is not in assets. It is in the man I am still learning to become, because of you." For the first time in years, Robert felt something unexpected. Not vindication, but peace. He looked up, and Bradley was standing straighter, not as a boy pleading for approval, but as a man willing to build a legacy of his own. "Dinner next week?" Bradley asked. "Only if you're cooking," Robert said. They shared a quiet smile. As Bradley drove away, Robert looked out over the horizon, the sky stretching endlessly above the garden Sarah planted. The world had not changed, but his son had. And somewhere in that vast silence, the past found its rightful place, and the future opened like a sunrise. Final closing narration. In the end, this was never a story about money. It was about something far more valuable. Respect. Legacy. The quiet strength of a man who never needed recognition to be powerful. And the painful journey of a son who had to lose everything to discover what true wealth really means. Because the greatest inheritance a father can give is not fortune. It is a lesson that echoes through generations. That dignity must never be surrendered, and respect must always be earned.